Special thanks to Philip Raby Specialist Cars for providing the car in this review, of course. They are based, for those who are unfamiliar with them, in Hampshire, in the south of England, and they have a very distinctly hand-picked selection of high-performance and highly collectible vehicles such as this one, and of course others which I've reviewed with them before. So if you are on the market for something like that, or at the very least would like to check out their current stock, then of course you can click the link right below the video in the description. I've said in a number of Beards and Cars reviews that I believe one of the best ways of viewing the performance car acceleration of change in real time is to look at the world of hot hatches and sports saloons. These high-performance executive cars such as Audis, Mercedes, BMW models, and also hot hatches from pretty much any brand who makes them. Now, take for example my daily driver, an R32 Golf. In the mid-2000s, that was the powerhouse, or at least one of the powerhouses of the hot hatch category. It had 250 horsepower, could do 0 to 60 in the low 6-second region. It was a beast of the time. It had a DSG gearbox, all-wheel drive, stuff that blew other hot hatches out of the water. Less than a decade later, though, we're looking at 300, 350 horsepower. These days, AMG Mercedes A-classes that can do 0 to 60 in under 4 seconds. I mean, 20 years ago, that was literally a supercar, and nothing else. Nowadays, that's hot hatches. And the prices are kind of, they're mirroring that as well. 50 grand for a hot hatch is quite a lot of money. Now, in the super saloon world, although not quite as extreme as the changes that have happened to hot hatches, a similar thing has happened. Even as far back as the 2000s, stuff like the V10 engine BMW M5, the mighty V10 Audi RS6 wagon or saloon, Mercedes with their supercharged AMGs, they were already powerhouse cars, and many of them are beloved to this day, and for good reason. This, though, proves yet again that acceleration of change waits for no one, because with smaller capacity, less cylinders, more focus on efficiency for a number of reasons, if not necessity of course due to legislation and various other things, these cars are just wiping the floor with what was the standard only a couple of years ago, to the point where you could put this car, this 4-door Sportback executive Audi, up against all but maybe 2 or 3 of the ultimate supercars of the 90s, and it would annihilate most of them. Maybe not always on a track, but most definitely on a road. And I believe that is one of the key things that a lot of people, a lot of journalists, a lot of car reviewers seem to completely gloss over about modern performance cars. And I think it's actually possibly the single biggest advantage that they have over older cars. And it's actually that they're safer. Not safer in terms of crashing, they're safer in terms of being accessible in terms of performance. These cars are so easy to get that kind of performance out of, and it's yet another reason why I've said that I believe, and I mentioned this in its own review, that the Nissan GT-R really changed everything in 2007 or so. It was a car that forced everyone else to up their game, because it made real life feel like you're playing Gran Turismo. It made performance so easy. And even though cars had done that before, none did it to that degree for that price bracket. Now we're seeing that to this day across the market, and this is no exception. This car is bonkers quick. It's a genuine supercar in terms of its spec sheet. It's a V8 with a twin turbo, all-wheel drive, a 0 to 60 time of 3.6, 3.7 seconds. This being the performance model, because apparently 552 horsepower isn't quite performance enough by Audi standards, this one puts out 600 horsepower and 553 pound-feet of torque, which is 750 newton meters. It puts that through an 8-speed gearbox, and if it's still not enough for you, you can even take the performance further than that by going for the RS7 Performance Dynamic, which raises the speed limiter from 155, as with most German cars, or 250 kilometers per hour, to a much more realistic 175 miles per hour. But wait, that's not enough. Well, JML style, you can take it even higher again to 190 miles per hour, beyond 300 kilometers an hour, in a car which is, for all intents and purposes, a really stylish family executive car, which could wipe the floor with something like a 90s Ferrari or Lambo handily, and in complete safety, complete comfort, and about as smooth as you could want a car like this to be. In fact, this car, thanks to those efficiency improvements, takes it even further again. The fuel economy is surprisingly good. The road tax is only £360 a year, which is insane for a 600 horsepower car. Now, the fuel economy is actually quoted, and I know many people won't care, but to me it's impressive when a car like this has any kind of good fuel economy at all. It can do 21 to the gallon around town, which of course is going to be, generally speaking, the worst conditions, about 39 on the motorway, or the highway for our American friends, and average about 30. But here's the impressive thing. According to Honest John, in other words, actual owners, it does do 30. That's excellent. And of course, when you add that on top of the space, the comfort, the style, and the ballistic performance, again, 3.6 seconds 0 to 60 and 190 miles an hour if you get yourself a Dynamic Plus, well, you really are talking about kind of perfect car territory. I mean, what else could you realistically want to change to make this any better? Of course, you can always improve things, you can always refine something. That's the whole Porsche 911 philosophy, and look at the results that gets. So a car is never quite perfect, but surely this has to be about as damn close as you can get in current car standards. Well, actually, yeah, it kind of is. For me, though, Audis have this unfortunate thing that sometimes happens, and I'm sure it's very much a personal preference thing, but a couple of other journalists and outlets have mirrored my thoughts here, wherein for some reason I can't quite put my finger on, certain Audi models and certain BMW models in particular, for whatever reason, even RS and M performance models respectively, there's something that they don't quite do for me. It's just this intangible thing. Maybe it's character, maybe it's personality, maybe it's just sheer fun, that they don't quite go all the way for my taste. Now, being a personal preference thing, that doesn't have that much relevance to the review overall, which is why I haven't put it to the forefront. I mention it though because that is how I felt, so that is the point of a review. You always have to put your own thoughts in there for the record. Now, on paper, academically, it is honestly about as perfect as you could want it to be. In fact, I think one of the key advantages this car has over what is, in my opinion, one of its greatest rivals and one of my personal favourite cars, the Porsche Panamera, similar for obvious reasons. Same family, same kind of DNA, even a similar kind of purpose, even though the Porsche started doing this first. I believe that the Porsche is more my kind of thing. It has the exotic badge, the more exotic, albeit controversial look. The Audi, though, is not controversially styled. It's a really stylish car, maybe the satin paint notwithstanding for some people, but even then it has a Batmobile quality to it. So the only real downside of the Porsche Panamera is not here in this case, because it looks great as well, which is why I say it's pretty damn close to perfect. In my opinion, the Porsche Panamera is perfect, but the style doesn't do it for some people. For me, it just swaps out those two. What the Porsche lacks in style, for me, Audi's lacking a little bit of charisma. I'm sure that will be a controversial statement, and it's one which I have made before, but I think some people may understand what I'm getting at. To me, that is the slight downside, in fact, of the Nissan GT-R's influence. To even keep that kind of standard going, other manufacturers were forced to up their game. The downside of that is when you are pursuing performance and efficiency and just sheer overwhelming competitive ability on the street in particular, well, you tend to sacrifice other things. If you take some of my own favourite cars, for example, that I've either owned or reviewed, they actually don't tend to be the fastest. They tend to be the ones that have more charisma, like the aforementioned Golf R32. Could I have bought a Golf R? Of course. Similar price in some cases, faster, more powerful, but doesn't have the personality. For me, this is a car for somebody who wants and values efficiency, doing a very good job, having things exceedingly well engineered, and having a car which, honestly, and no knock to it in any sense, does everything you could possibly want it to do. It's fast, it's stylish, it's spacious, it's comfortable, it's surprisingly efficient. I mean, what more could you realistically want? Certainly from a daily driver, but it's a daily that is legitimately as fast as a supercar, except it also has an advantage over electric vehicles because it still sounds great as well. It's a small thing, but it's a cool thing as well. And of course you don't have range anxiety as you would with something like a Tesla. So for me, my thoughts are fairly straightforward on this car. It's not the kind of thing that I would personally run because it's not really my style of car. I'm not really an Audi kind of guy. But I think for those who are even remotely interested in knowing what this is like to drive, if it already appeals to you, if you already enjoy Audi RS models, and certainly if you've owned Audi RSs in the past, maybe an RS4, an older RS6, even something like an RS5, I think you will love this car. And as I alluded to in the thumbnail, it really is that. It's an executive rocket ship, and for most people you probably wouldn't really want more than that. And incidentally, when it comes to pricing here in the UK, of course they are expensive cars, they're still relatively new. You can see the price on this particular example toward the start of the video, and the range does vary quite a bit depending on the miles. If you get up around a 100,000 mile car or more, well, you can get one for maybe £30,000. On the higher end of the spectrum, about 55 to 65,000 pounds for much lower miles in great condition. So it does vary quite a bit. And generally speaking, as with most cars, you should probably be looking at somewhere between those two. In other words, the kind of price that this one is for a really nice example that balances not crazy high miles, but not so low that you'd be scared to use it. And just to round off the video in a way which touches on one of the critiques which the RS7 sometimes receives, it is sometimes criticised for its handling profile. And what I mean by that is the kind of personality it has through corners, the kind of steering it has. Not that it's bad, but that it maybe lacks some feel, maybe it's perhaps vague or dull. Certain cars tend to be critiqued for their brakes in that way, the Mercedes SLR for example not having enough brake feel. I've got to say personally, I don't find too much merit in that critique. I think this thing handles very well. It certainly stops very well. Carbon ceramics tend to help with that. And the handling I think is spot on. I mean, it is a 2-ton Sportback at the end of the day, so if you're expecting it to handle like a Lotus, well, it's not going to. That's just the way it is. I think it handles its weight, its size, its performance exceedingly well, and thankfully for something which is as brutally fast as this car is, and it really is brutal when you put your foot down and switch from the 2-litre 4-cylinder mode to the 4-litre V8 mode with that full 600 horsepower, well, thankfully it stops, goes and turns about as well as each other, and keeping those three all in the same kind of region is essential for making a car that feels, as I alluded to earlier on, safe enough to really use that performance. Ultimately, it's an outstandingly well-engineered car, and if nothing else, a fantastic rival to one of my favourites, the Panamera. And if you want to check out my thoughts on the Panamera in GTS form, in hybrid form, you can find those reviews here on the channel as well. But overall, that's it for my thoughts on this one. Of course, stick around on the channel for more Beards and Cars reviews, and until next time, I'll see you then. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.